Helen, you will receive a piece of art from Swiss artist Cornelia Hesse-Honecker, and she did aquarels of insects after Chernobyl. And there are little changes, formations, and I mean, it doesn't pay justice to the original because you see in very fine lines is the insect, and then you see what grows out of the head.
It's a tumor.
Yes, of a bug.
Like a pathology museum.
It will be shipped to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It feels like the pathology museum. I mean, this part's beautiful. Anyway, I'm going to be debating tomorrow with the Secretary of Energy, or the Minister of Energy in Britain, and a couple of other men, I think partly from the nuclear industry, but they're not doctors. They don't know any medicine or biology, so it's going to be good. I don't really know what to say, Xanthi. There are wonderful women in this movement, wonderful women, and Xanthi's one of them, and you too, and you, all wonderful women everywhere I turn, and men, but I think we have an ability to connect our right and left brains. Our corpus callosum is larger generally than in men, although that's being disputed these days. Anyway, I won't get into the limbic system and what stimulates dopamine and the like in men, but I'll be good. I find it really interesting that we're at Urania. And was she a Greek goddess? Of what? Destruction? Astronomy. And I started off in Australia with uranium, and that is the rainbow snake. And the rainbow snake is an Aboriginal symbol that is depicted on a waterfall going down near the Ranger uranium mine. And the Aboriginal songline says, if the rainbow snake is disturbed, it will devour the world. So here we are at Urania, and there's the rainbow snake, and I'm from Australia. We've got 40% of the world's richest uranium. We have a revolting Minister for Energy called Martin Ferguson, who is rushing around the world selling uranium as if there's no tomorrow, which there will not be if we continue selling uranium. The uranium in the Fukushima reactors is Australian uranium. Do I get any voice in Australia to say anything? No. I'm even more rejected than Germaine Greer, who wrote The Female Eunuch. And that's something. You may not get the joke. I suppose I should tell you a little bit about how my desperate passion developed. I did read On the Beach when I was a young adolescent, and it was about a nuclear war that occurred by accident, and everyone in the Northern Hemisphere died, and the only people left alive were people in Melbourne, which is where I lived. And gradually, it's like Fukushima. The radiation cloud came down, and people were having their last gin and tonic in the Melbourne club, and the government dispensed cyanide capsules to give to the babies so they could die suddenly and not of acute vomiting and diarrhea and acute radiation illness. It was just an ordinary story of ordinary people in Melbourne. At the end of the book, the beautiful, elegant streets were there with St. George slaying the dragon outside the public library, trams in the street, bits of paper blowing down in the breeze, a blind gently flapping. And that was the end of the human race. That image branded my soul. I then went to first year medical school, aged 17. I learned about the Muller experiments with Drosophila fruit fly. And at that time, 1956, Russia and America were going hell for leather, testing nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. And Linus Pauling and Barry Commoner and others were saying, children are going to get leukemia from this. I just learned about genetic mutation. I couldn't understand on earth what these fellows thought they were doing. What on earth did they think they were doing? I tried to talk in the refectory to my fellow students. Australia's a very misogynist country, and they'd look up from their poker games and say, what's that mad Sheila talking about? Sheila is a derogatory term for a woman in Australia. So I knew I would have no impact with my fellow students. But being of curious disposition, I just automatically read everything I could find in every paper about nuclear weapons. And then I went to America and spent 3 years from 66 to 69, and I had 3 babies under 3, because I loved having babies. That's my addiction, or was. And I think it was the oxytocin that I was really addicted to. You know oxytocin? It's a very nice hormone. It makes you feel very, very nurturing. It's a bit orgasmic. I'm talking to doctors, right? Anyway, this is all medical. So, but I was bored because I got sick of talking baby talk. So I got a part-time job at Harvard in the cystic fibrosis unit with Harry Schwachman, who was one of the pioneers in cystic fibrosis. And it was a wonderful time. All the people who'd written the monographs were there. Louis K. Diamond and Newhouser and Nader, the cardiologist. Wonderful. Just it was like being in the Louvre. And I learned how to treat CF. So I went back to Australia. My mother had just died. I was very depressed. I went through the Kubler-Ross stages of grief. But I'd lived there when Bobby Kennedy, I got up one morning and he was lying on the floor bleeding on the television. Martin Luther King was killed and we went to the Boston Symphony. Nixon was elected. My then husband didn't get up all the next day because we knew he was clinically paranoid. The anti-Vietnam War protests were happening. The Flower Children, Chicago, the Democratic Convention, and I saw a democracy in action. And I went back to Australia, which was dead. Everyone's frightfully nice, very British. And then I found out that there were 1,500 picocuries of radiation in the rainwater in Adelaide where I lived, and there'd been a drought, and so our tanks were empty and they were filling with radioactive water. So I wrote a letter to the paper saying this is not good, children could get leukemia from this and cancer, and they didn't publish it. Well, having read The Female Eunuch, I was a very flamboyant feminist, and I thought, can I say those things? Can I really speak my truth? And it changed my life. I rang the editor and said, where is my letter? And he was very condescending and said, Madam, we get hundreds of letters a day. And I said, yes, but mine's important. And he got it out of the rubbish tin and unscrewed it and published it. That night I was on television talking about children getting leukemia. Well, the head of, I won't go through my whole life story, it'll get boring, but this is just a little snippet. The head of the nuclear medicine department at the Royal Adelaide Hospital called me hysterical, and I didn't know what I was talking about, and how dare I talk about radiation, and I was attacked from all sides. All I was talking about was what I'd learnt in medical school. Yes, I made a few mistakes, but the way to learn in medicine and in life is to make more mistakes. They asked an 84-year-old woman on her deathbed what you would have done differently. She said, I would have made more mistakes, because that's how you learn life. That's how we learn about medicine. So anyway, I was on television all the time talking about French tests, and the Australians don't like the French. They think they're arrogant. And people stopped buying French perfume. They wouldn't drink French wine. The mail workers wouldn't deliver French mail. It was a revolution. And the Australians said, typically, those bloody French coming down to the South Pacific, blowing up their bombs. 75% of Australians rose up. The whole letters page to the editor was about the bloody French. And we got a new Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, and he took the French to the International Court of Justice with New Zealand, and they were forced to test underground. So I saw what Jefferson said: an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. All you have to do is teach people. That's how you lead a revolution. At the time I was working 80 hours a week as a paediatric intern. I was told that I would be fired if I didn't stop talking. The hospital was getting more calls about the French test than about the patients. I said, well, is my work suffering? He said, no. I would take a patient, a baby, insert the IV in the scalp vein, run upstairs, take my white coat off, do a television interview, run back downstairs and admit another patient. So that's how I learned that medicine must be political as well. How long did it take Semmelweis to get doctors to wash their hands? 60 years? Doctors are very conservative. I've been conservative myself. How long did they take to turn off the pump in London that was producing the cholera? A long time. But you practice preventive medicine through the political process. So you have to educate both the people in a democracy, the public, and the politicians, who are not the leaders, they are our servants. And then that's how we have, after Jonas Salk and Sabine, we've prevented polio. That's how we've almost eliminated smallpox. We learn, we understand the etiology, and then we put it into political practice around the world by educating politicians very strongly. Now we've got this nuclear problem. Well, the next thing I did was I found out we were going to sell uranium, and I didn't even know what uranium was. So I went to the university library and I got out a book by Goffman and Tamplin called Poisoned Power. Goffman is a doctor, was. He discovered uranium-234. He worked on plutonium, and he was asked by the Atomic Energy Commission to study nuclear power and the limits of radiation that people were allowed to receive. He came out with a report that totally damned nuclear power in terms of malignancy and genetic mutations. They fired him. Poison Power was the most dangerous, frightening book I'd ever read during my medical career. I developed alopecia areata as I was reading the book. So I went back to the press, Murdoch, who championed me when I was doing French tests, because it's good to have an external enemy, right? But when we find we have 40% of the world's richest uranium, Murdoch just cut me off like that, and has ever since. Why? Well, balance of payments. We all need 2 cars and 2 refrigerators, one for the beer and one for the food. You know what Australians are like. So I didn't know what to do. No media interest. So I had a friend who was an engine driver, and he said, Helen, let's write to all the unions, and we're very unionised, 86 unions, asking if you can talk about the medical effects of mining uranium. Yes, they said, but you'll never convince us because we need the jobs. Jobs, jobs, jobs. So I was premenopausal. I dressed in my black velvet slacks and a satin shirt, and I looked good. I'd turn up, but they had already been well lubricated with beer before I talked. Australian unions. They gave me 10 minutes. And through the first 5 minutes, they talked loudly, and I thought, how am I, through my talk, rude? How will I get their attention? And suddenly, a light went on and I started talking about the medical effects of radiation upon their testicles. Australian workers don't care about very much, but they do care about that pair of organs. And there was a rapt silence. You could have heard a pin drop. And then I had 5 minutes to get through the whole genetic nuclear fuel cycle. They sent a letter to the Prime Minister immediately saying we won't put up with this. I got round to speak to the majority of unions at 6 in the morning when they were leaving on a dirt floor with a dirty old blackboard drawing sperm and eggs and genes and mutation. Well, eventually the whole union movement in Australia banned uranium mining and export for 5 years. Point number 2, if you educate people, they behave in a responsible fashion. We are doctors. Even the worst politicians, when they get appendicitis or a cerebral tumour, come to us. We have absolute authority and absolute credibility politically, and that's what we must use. I won't go on because it's too long and it can get boring, but basically I suppose I've led 3 revolutions. One against the French nuclear atomic atmospheric tests, one against uranium mining in Australia, and one in America, and I suppose globally, against nuclear weapons and the threat of nuclear war. How? Only and simply by medical education. My work is as a physician. That is my vocation. It's like being a nun. I was born to be a doctor. I wish that I'd stayed in medicine because I love it so much. This is very boring work, giving the same talk again and again. Come on, children. 1 and 1 equals 2. This is a gene. This is a new mutation of the DNA molecule. It's so boring. But it must be done. If I stop the work now, I get deeply depressed and need Zoloft. The way I keep my spirits up, as the previous speaker said, Heinz, is I do the work, I speak the truth, absolutely the truth, and it makes me feel a little bit hopeful or that I've done a good job. And if I give a good lecture and I change 1,000 people's minds that night and their lives forever, it feels like I did when I was in the cystic fibrosis clinic looking after my dying patients, their siblings and the parents and their marriage counselling. Deeply tired, very hungry and deeply fulfilled. And what I've realised through my life is we were born to serve. The only thing that makes us happy, and we all know that as doctors, is to serve our patients. That's what medicine is, service. It's a sacred profession. Now we have a big job ahead of us, which is to close down the nuclear industry once and for all, because they are liars, and I'm fed up with the lying. I'm fed up with them thinking they understand radiation and they haven't a clue. Tomorrow on CNN, I'm going to talk about genomic instability, bystander effects, tritium combining with the DNA molecule. What? I don't know. They're taping it, I think. You'll have to look at CNN International. 300 million viewers. What an opportunity. Carbon-14 getting into the DNA molecule. Beta, alpha, gamma radiation. What it means, incubation time for cancer, latent period of carcinogenesis, teratogenesis, deformed children, 2,600 genetic diseases, what it feels like to treat a child with CF, go to the mother when the baby's born and say, your child is a Down syndrome, and this is her first baby and she's 41. Only we understand really, in a way, life and death and how precious life is. That's why we did medicine, to look after the world. Now we hold the world in the palm of our hands. We are the curators of life on earth, and we physicians, who are so highly educated, are now the ones who are the new leaders. So what we do is we close down all the reactors in the world, we stop uranium mining, and we abolish nuclear weapons once and for all. Of the 25,000 H-bombs in the world, Russia and America own 97%. They are the rogue states holding the world at nuclear ransom. How dare they? How dare they? You are very powerful, Germany. You're part of NATO. You part of NATO? Yeah. Go for it. NATO is run by America. I'm sick of the Americans. They're arrogant, ignorant, and naive. You've learnt. They haven't. They've killed over 1 million people in Iraq, civilians. That's genocide. That's genocide. And they've done it so that they can make more weapons and steal $1 trillion a year from the American people. $1 trillion on death they spend. Okay, now it's your turn. Germany, I bow to you. Do it. Thank you.